The frozen January wind cut through my jacket as I stared at the rusted-out furnace in my basement, water pooling around my boots from where the heat exchanger had finally given up the ghost. My name is Travis Yates, and I had just moved into my new townhouse in Oakmont, Pennsylvania 3 months ago, right before the holidays. Now here I was, facing a dead furnace in the middle of what the weather reports were calling the coldest week in 20 years. I pulled out my phone and called the HVAC company I had found online. The guy who answered, Mike, laughed when I asked if he could come out that day. "Buddy, I've got a waiting list 2 weeks long. Everyone's furnaces are dropping like flies in this cold snap. Best I can do is maybe get someone out there next Wednesday, and that's if we don't get more calls." I hung up and immediately called 3 more companies. Same story everywhere. The temperature in my house was already dropping, and the thermostat reads 62 degrees. By morning, it would be freezing in here. I had a 7-year-old daughter, Emma, who was with her mother this week, but she was supposed to come back to my place on Friday. I could not have her staying in an icebox. That is when I remembered the portable propane heater I had bought for camping last summer. It was one of those Mr. Heater models, rated for indoor use with an automatic shutoff if it tipped over. I dragged it up from the storage area, bought 3 20-pound propane tanks from the hardware store, and set it up in my living room. The thing kicked out serious heat, warming up the main floor within an hour. I kept the bathroom door open so the pipes would not freeze, and I felt pretty proud of myself for solving the problem. The next morning, I was sipping coffee and reading the news on my tablet when someone knocked on my door. Not a friendly knock either. This was an aggressive, authoritative pounding that made me think something was seriously wrong. I opened the door to find a woman in her mid-40s with severely pulled-back blonde hair, wearing a puffy North Face jacket and holding a clipboard. Behind her stood a man about the same age with a camera. "Travis Yates?" she asked, her voice clipped and sharp. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Patricia Winters, president of the Oakmont Meadows Homeowners Association. This is Doug Simmons, our compliance officer." She gestured at the man with the camera. "We received a report about an unauthorized heating device on your property." I blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Patricia pushed past me into my entryway without being invited. Doug followed, already snapping pictures of my living room. The propane heater sat in the corner, quietly doing its job. "That," Patricia said, pointing at the heater like it was a coiled rattlesnake. "That is a clear violation of the Oakmont Meadows Homeowner Association Guidelines, Section 7, Paragraph 4, which explicitly prohibits unsightly temporary structures and equipment visible from common areas." "It's inside my house," I said, confusion mixing with rising anger. "How is it visible from common areas?" Doug held up his camera. "We could see it through your window from the sidewalk. That's technically a common area." I looked at my front window. You would have to stand at a specific angle and really look to see the heater from outside. Someone had definitely been snooping. "Look, my furnace died yesterday. This is an emergency. I have my daughter coming back in a few days, and I cannot have her freezing. Every HVAC company in the area is booked solid for at least 2 weeks. Patricia made a note on her clipboard. "That's unfortunate, but it doesn't exempt you from HOA regulations. The covenant you signed when you purchased this property clearly states that all modifications or additions visible from outside the property must receive prior written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. It's a portable heater. It's not a modification. It's temporary emergency equipment." "The HOA sees it differently," Patricia said. She pulled a sheet of paper from her clipboard and handed it to me. "This is your first formal warning. You have 72 hours to remove the unsightly equipment. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $200 per day until compliance is achieved. I stared at the paper, unable to believe what I was reading. You want me to freeze? We want you to find a solution that doesn't violate community standards. Perhaps you could purchase an electric space heater. Those are less unsightly and don't require visible propane tanks. Electric space heaters won't heat a whole townhouse in this weather. They'll run up my electric bill to $1,000 and probably trip the breaker. Patricia's expression did not change. She had probably heard every excuse in the book and didn't care. That's not the HOA's concern. Community standards must be maintained. Good day, Mr. Yates. They left, and I stood there holding the violation notice, my coffee forgotten. I had dealt with petty bureaucracy before, but this was something else entirely. I looked up the HOA guidelines online and found the section they had cited. It was vague enough to be interpreted however they wanted. Basically, if Patricia thought something was unsightly, it was unsightly. I called my real estate agent, Monica, who had sold me the townhouse. Monica, did you know the HOA here was this aggressive? She sighed. Travis, I disclosed all the HOA documents at closing. You signed them. I know. But seriously, they're threatening to fine me for using a heater during an emergency. Patricia Winters runs that HOA like it's her personal fiefdom. She's been president for 8 years. Nobody runs against her because nobody wants the headache. My advice: just comply until you can get your furnace fixed. It's not worth the fight. But it was worth the fight to me. Not because I enjoyed conflict, but because the principle of the thing gnawed at me. I was keeping my family from freezing, and someone with nothing better to do was peering through my windows and calling the HOA to complain. I decided to ignore the warning and keep the heater running. What else could I do? Freeze. I closed my curtains so nobody could see inside and hoped that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. 2 days later, another knock on my door. This time it was Doug Simmons alone with his camera and another violation notice. The fine had started. $200 per day, retroactive to when the 72 hours had expired that morning at 9 a.m. You've got to be kidding me, I said. Doug shrugged. I just enforce the rules, man. Take it up with Patricia. I took it up with Patricia. I called the number on the violation notice and got her voicemail. I left a message explaining the situation, my daughter coming to visit, the extreme cold, the unavailability of HVAC repair. I asked for a temporary exemption. She called back an hour later. Mr. Yates, the HOA does not grant exemptions for convenience. This isn't convenience, it's necessity. It's literally below zero outside. Then I suggest you find hotel accommodations until your furnace is repaired. Many families do exactly that during home emergencies. I'm not paying for a hotel for 2 weeks when I have a perfectly good house. Then remove the unsightly equipment. The choice is yours. Good day. She hung up. I wanted to throw my phone across the room, but I needed it. Instead, I did what any reasonable person does in the modern age. I started documenting everything. I took photos of the heater, photos of my thermostat showing the indoor temperature without it running, photos of the frozen conditions outside. I recorded the dates and times of all interactions with the HOA. I saved the violation notices. I had a feeling I was going to need all of it. The fines kept accumulating. By the end of the first week, I was supposedly on the hook for $1,400. I still had not heard from any HVAC companies about an earlier appointment. The cold snap was not letting up. The news reported that Pittsburgh, just 25 miles away, had hit -8 degrees, a record low. Then something interesting happened. I was walking to my car on Saturday morning when I ran into my neighbor from 3 doors down, an older man named George who had lived in Oakmont Meadows for 15 years. He waved me over to his driveway. "Hey, Travis, I heard about your trouble with the HOA. Word travels fast. Small community. Listen, I want you to know something. Patricia Winters and that compliance committee, they've been pulling this kind of thing for years. They hit me with fines once because my mailbox was the wrong shade of black. I had to repaint it 3 times before they approved it. That's insane. It gets better. You know why Patricia is so gung-ho about enforcing every little rule? Because she's got nothing better to do." George shook his head. "Because she owns a property management company, Winters Property Solutions. When homeowners get fed up with the fines and violations, they often hire property managers to deal with the HOA for them. Guess which property management company most people in this neighborhood use?" The pieces clicked together in my head. "She creates problems so people pay her to solve them." Exactly. It's not technically illegal, but it's shady as hell. I've thought about filing a complaint with the state, but I've only got 2 years left until I retire and move to Florida. I don't need the headache. This information changed things. Patricia was not just a petty tyrant. She was running a racket. I thanked George and went back inside, my mind working on what to do next. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Is this Travis Yates?" A woman's voice, younger than Patricia's. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Heather Klein. I'm an attorney with Klein and Associates in Pittsburgh. I specialize in property law and HOA disputes. I heard about your situation through the grapevine, and I'd like to talk to you about representation." "How did you hear about my situation?" "I have clients in Oakmont Meadows. The HOA issues there are fairly well known in the legal community. Patricia Winters has been a problem for years." We talked for 30 minutes. Heather explained that Pennsylvania law had specific provisions for emergency situations that could override HOA covenants. She also mentioned that the conflict of interest with Patricia's property management company could be grounds for challenging her authority as HOA president. "The problem is," Heather said, "fighting the HOA legally costs money. I'm talking several $1,000s minimum even if we win. Most people just pay the fines because it's cheaper." "What if we found other people she's done this to? Could we file something together, a class action?" "Possibly, but those are complicated. Let me do some research and get back to you." I felt like I had an ally now, which helped, but the immediate problem remained. My daughter Emma was coming back the next day, and the house was only habitable because of the propane heater that was costing me $200 a day in HOA fines. Emma's mother, Jennifer, dropped her off Sunday afternoon. Emma ran up and hugged me, her blonde pigtails bouncing. She was wearing her favorite purple jacket with unicorns on it. "Daddy, I missed you." "Missed you too, sweetheart. How was Mom's place?" "Good, we made cookies. Chocolate chip." Jennifer lingered at the door, and I could tell she wanted to say something. Emma ran inside to check on her room, and Jennifer stepped closer. "Travis, Emma mentioned something about your heat being broken. The furnace died. I've got a temporary solution until I can get it fixed." "Is it safe?" "Yes, it's rated for indoor use. Automatic safety shutoff." I'm not taking any chances with Emma here. Jennifer looked uncertain. "Okay, but if it becomes a problem, call me. She can stay extra time at my place. It'll be fine." After Jennifer left, Emma and I spent the evening playing board games and watching movies. She didn't seem to notice anything wrong, and the house was warm enough. I felt like I was managing the situation. Monday morning brought another visit from Doug Simmons. This time he had a new document. "What now?" I asked. "HOA board meeting Wednesday night, 7 p.m. at the community center." Patricia wants you there to discuss your ongoing violation. This is mandatory attendance as per the covenant section 12. I took the notice. I'll be there. Wednesday evening was bitter cold. I bundled Emma up and dropped her at Jennifer's place before heading to the Oakmont Meadows Community Center. The building was a small brick structure with a meeting room that held about 50 people. When I arrived, there were maybe 15 residents there, most of them older folks who probably served on various committees. Patricia sat at the front table with 4 other board members. Doug was there too, camera ready as always. I recognized one of the board members as Helen, the woman who lived across the street from me. "Let's call this meeting to order," Patricia said, banging a gavel. Actual gavel. She was that type of person. They went through standard business first. Approval of last month's minutes. Financial report. Discussion of landscaping contracts for the spring. It was all mind-numbingly boring, and I could tell Patricia was making me wait on purpose. Finally, she got to my item on the agenda. Item 7. Ongoing violation at 2847 Maple Court. Mr. Yates is present. "Mr. Yates, would you like to address the board?" I stood up. "Yes. As I've explained multiple times, my furnace broke during the coldest week of the year. Every HVAC company in the region is backed up for weeks. I'm using a safe, indoor-rated portable heater to keep my home habitable for myself and my 7-year-old daughter. I don't understand why this is a violation when it's clearly an emergency situation." Patricia made a show of flipping through her papers. "The board has reviewed your case and determined that emergency circumstances do not constitute grounds for violating community aesthetic standards. The portable heater and propane tanks are visible from common areas and detract from property values. Have property values been assessed? Has anyone actually complained besides whoever reported me in the first place? The HOA board represents all residents in maintaining standards." A woman in the back raised her hand. It was Helen from across the street. Patricia looked annoyed but recognized her. "Yes, Helen. I live across from Travis. I can barely see anything through his window even when I'm trying. And honestly, in this cold, I think we should be cutting people some slack. My furnace has been acting up too. What if mine breaks next? Are you going to fine me for trying to stay warm?" Patricia's expression hardened. "If you violate the covenant, yes, the rules apply equally to everyone." Another hand went up. It was George, my neighbor, who had told me about Patricia's property management business. "I'd like to make a motion that the board grant a temporary exemption for emergency heating equipment during extreme weather conditions. Say, when temperatures fall below 15 degrees for consecutive days." "Motion not recognized," Patricia said immediately. "This board has already ruled on the matter. You can't just ignore a motion from a homeowner," George said. "That's not how parliamentary procedure works. This isn't a formal parliamentary body. We operate under the guidelines established in the covenant. The motion is irrelevant to the current enforcement action." I could see George getting red in the face, but he sat down. Patricia continued. "Mr. Yates, as of today, your accumulated fines total $2,800. If the violation is not remedied within 48 hours, the HOA will place a lien on your property. Do you understand? A lien. That would affect my ability to sell or refinance." This had escalated beyond petty fines into something that could seriously impact my life. "I understand that you're more interested in collecting fines than helping residents," I said. "And I understand that you run a property management company that benefits from making people's lives difficult. That seems like a serious conflict of interest." The room went silent. Patricia's face went pale, then red. "That's an outrageous accusation with no basis in fact. This meeting is adjourned." She banged the gavel and stood up quickly, gathering her papers. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Several residents came up to me afterward, including Helen and George. "That took guts," Helen said. "She's going to come after you hard now." "She's already coming after me hard. What's she going to do, find me more? She'll find other violations," George warned. "Trust me. She'll inspect every inch of your property looking for anything she can cite you for. Wrong color welcome mat, leaves in your gutter, anything." He was right. Over the next 2 days, I received 3 additional violation notices. One for a small crack in my driveway that compromised aesthetic standards. One for storing my trash cans on the side of my house instead of in the garage, even though there was literally no room in my garage with all my tools and Emma's bike stuff. One for having a package delivery box on my porch for more than 24 hours after delivery. Each violation came with its own fine schedule if not corrected. I called Heather Klein and told her everything. "She's retaliating," Heather said. "That's actually useful for us. Keep documenting everything. Dates, times, what violations she's citing. The more unreasonable she gets, the better our case becomes. How long until we can do something about this?" I've found 3 other homeowners in Oakmont Meadows willing to join a complaint. "But Travis, I need to be honest with you. This could take months, maybe longer. And the HOA can continue enforcement while we fight them in court. So what do I do in the meantime? That's up to you. You can comply and pay the fines, or you can keep fighting and risk the lien." I thought about it all night. By morning, I had made a decision. I was going to call Patricia's bluff. I was not going to comply with any of the violations I considered unreasonable, and I was going to force the HOA to follow through on their threats. Sometimes you have to push back against bullies, even when it costs you. The next day, I got a call from the HVAC company. "Mr. Yates, this is Mike from Comfort Systems. We had a cancellation, and I can get a crew out to your place tomorrow morning if you're available." Finally, some good news. "Yes, absolutely." "What time?" "Around 8 a.m. The crew showed up as promised. 2 technicians spent 4 hours installing a new high-efficiency furnace. It cost me $4,800, but I had been expecting that. Furnaces aren't cheap. By early afternoon, I had heat running through my whole house. I could turn off the propane heater, but I didn't turn it off, not right away. I wanted to make a point. I called Doug Simmons directly. "Doug, this is Travis Yates. I wanted to let you know my furnace has been repaired and is operational. However, I'm going to continue using my emergency heater for 1 more day to make sure the new furnace is working properly. After that, the heater will be removed." "Okay, I'll note that in your file. I also want to formally dispute all fines that have been levied against me. I'll be sending a written dispute to the HOA board." Silence on the other end. "Then, you'll need to take that up with Patricia." "I intend to." That evening, I drafted a detailed letter disputing the fines. I cited Pennsylvania emergency statutes, documented the extreme weather conditions, included statements from HVAC companies showing the backup in service calls, and pointed out that my actions were reasonable and necessary to prevent property damage and ensure the safety of my minor child. I also formally requested an accounting of all HOA funds and how they were being used, which was my right as a homeowner. I sent the letter certified mail to the HOA board's official address. 2 days later, I got a response. It was not from Patricia. It was from a lawyer representing the HOA. The letter informed me that the HOA was proceeding with placing a lien on my property for unpaid fines totaling $3,600. I had 30 days to pay in full or enter into a payment plan. Failure to do so would result in foreclosure proceedings. Foreclosure. They were threatening to take my house over a propane heater. I forwarded the letter to Heather Klein immediately. "They're bluffing," she said when she called me back. "Foreclosure over HOA fines is incredibly rare and requires a lengthy legal process. They're trying to scare you into paying." "It's working. I'm scared." "Don't be. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to file an emergency injunction to prevent them from placing the lien until we can have a hearing. At that hearing, we'll argue that the fines were improperly levied and that the HOA violated its own procedures." I've also been doing research on Patricia Winters. Did you know she was sued in 2019 by residents of a different neighborhood? No. For what? Mismanagement of HOA funds. The case was settled out of court with sealed terms, but the fact that it happened is public record. It establishes a pattern of behavior. How does that help us? It shows she has a history of abusing her authority. Combined with the conflict of interest from her property management business and the retaliatory violations she's hit you with, we can build a case that she's not fit to serve as HOA president. This was getting bigger than I had intended. All I wanted was to heat my house. Now we were talking about removing someone from office and exposing financial mismanagement. "I'm in," I said. "Let's do whatever we need to do." Over the next week, Heather filed the injunction. We got a court date for February 12th, about 2 weeks away. In the meantime, I continued documenting everything. Patricia and Doug seemed to back off slightly. No new violation notices appeared on my door. I figured their lawyer had advised them to cool it while litigation was pending. But then something happened that changed everything. On February 8th, we got hit with another brutal cold snap. Temperatures dropped to -5 overnight. I woke up around 3 a.m. to Emma standing next to my bed. "Daddy, I'm cold." The house felt freezing. I checked the thermostat, 52 degrees and dropping. The furnace was not running. I went down to the basement and found water everywhere. A pipe had burst in the wall near the furnace, and water was spraying out. The furnace itself had shut down, probably due to moisture or electrical issues from the leak. I shut off the main water supply and called the emergency plumber line. They said they could get someone out by morning. In the meantime, I set up the propane heater again and got Emma settled on the couch with blankets. In the morning, the plumber arrived and assessed the damage. The pipe had burst in a section of wall shared with my neighbor's unit. It was part of the common plumbing system, which meant the HOA was responsible for repairs, not me. "You'll need to file a claim with the HOA," the plumber said. "This is their problem, but I can do a temporary patch to stop the leak and get your water back on. It'll be about $400. I paid it. I didn't have a choice. But now I had ammunition against Patricia and her HOA board. I called Doug Simmons. "Doug, I need to report a maintenance issue. The common pipes burst in my unit. There's water damage and the HOA needs to send someone out to make permanent repairs." "I'll pass it along to Patricia." "When can I expect someone?" "We'll get to it as soon as we can. We've got a lot of properties to manage." "Doug, this is a serious plumbing issue. It's causing damage to my property." "I understand. We'll get to it." He hung up. Days passed. Nobody from the HOA came to inspect the damage or arrange repairs. The temporary patch was holding, but my basement was still a mess, and my furnace was not operating at full capacity because of moisture in the electrical system. I was running the propane heater again to supplement. On February 11th, the day before our court hearing, I got an angry phone call from Patricia herself. "Mr. Yates, you are once again operating unsightly temporary equipment in violation of community standards. This is now your 4th violation. The fines are accumulating." "Patricia, the reason I'm running the heater is because the HOA's pipes burst and flooded my basement." My furnace is damaged because of your neglect. Where's the repair crew you were supposed to send? We'll address the pipe issue in due course. That doesn't give you permission to violate the covenant. So you're fining me because your negligence damaged my property and I'm trying to keep my daughter from freezing. The violations are separate issues. If you have a maintenance complaint, file it in writing through the proper channels. I already reported it to Doug. Then it's in the queue. I could not believe what I was hearing. The HOA had caused damage to my property through poor maintenance of common pipes, and now they were fining me for dealing with the consequences. Patricia, I'll see you in court tomorrow. And I'm adding this to my list of complaints. Good day, Mr. Yates. The hearing the next day was held at the Allegheny County Courthouse in downtown Pittsburgh. Heather met me outside, carrying a briefcase full of documents. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I'm fighting City Hall. Or something smaller and pettier than City Hall. That's about right. The HOA's lawyer is Nathan Cross. He's competent but not exceptional. I've dealt with him before. He'll try to argue that the covenant gives the HOA broad discretion. We need to show that they've exceeded that discretion and acted in bad faith. The hearing was in front of Judge Sarah Martinez, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and an efficient demeanor. Both sides presented their arguments. Nathan Cross went first, arguing that the HOA had every right to enforce aesthetic standards and that I had repeatedly violated clear covenant terms despite multiple warnings. Then Heather presented our side. She walked through the timeline, the emergency circumstances, the retaliatory additional violations, Patricia's conflict of interest, and the recent pipe burst that the HOA had failed to address. Your Honor, Heather said, this case represents a clear pattern of abuse of authority by the HOA president. She has used her position to harass my client for taking reasonable emergency measures during extreme weather. She has leveraged her private business interests to create problems she can then profit from solving. And when my client stood up to her, she retaliated with frivolous violations and threatened foreclosure. This is not how HOAs are meant to operate under Pennsylvania law. Judge Martinez listened carefully, taking notes. When both sides had finished, she asked some questions. Mr. Cross, can you explain why the HOA has not addressed the burst pipe situation in Mr. Yates' unit? Nathan Cross shuffled his papers. Your Honor, the HOA has a maintenance schedule and all issues are addressed in order of priority. A burst pipe causing property damage is not a priority. The pipe has been temporarily repaired. Permanent repairs are scheduled. When? I don't have that information in front of me. Judge Martinez did not look impressed. She turned to me. Mr. Yates, is the temporary heater still in use? Yes, Your Honor. My furnace was damaged by the pipe burst. Until the HOA makes proper repairs and I can ensure my furnace is fully operational, I need the supplemental heat. Is the heater safe? Yes, Your Honor. It's rated for indoor use and has automatic safety features. The judge made more notes than looked at both lawyers. Here's my ruling. I'm granting the injunction. The HOA is prohibited from placing a lien on Mr. Yates' property pending resolution of these issues. Furthermore, the HOA is ordered to complete permanent repairs to the burst pipe within 7 days, and to compensate Mr. Yates for any documented costs related to the emergency repairs he was forced to make. As for the fines, I'm reducing them to nominal damages of $100, contingent on Mr. Yates removing the temporary heater within 3 days of the HOA completing its required repairs. If the HOA fails to complete repairs within the 7-day window, the fines are dismissed entirely. Nathan Cross started to object, but the judge held up her hand. I'm not finished. I'm also ordering an independent audit of Oakmont Meadows HOA finances. The potential conflict of interest raised by Miss Klein is concerning, and if there's any misuse of funds, it needs to be discovered. The audit will be completed by a court-appointed accountant within 60 days. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down. Heather and I walked out of the courthouse into the cold February afternoon. I felt like I had just won a battle, but I was not sure the war was over. What happens now? I asked. Now Patricia and the HOA board have to decide if they want to keep fighting or if they want to comply. My guess is they'll comply. The judge essentially gave them a slap on the wrist and a warning. If they push further and the audit finds problems, they could face serious consequences. And if they don't comply, then we go back to court, and the judge will not be happy with them. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Doug Simmons showed up at my door on February 14th with a plumbing crew. They spent 2 days repairing the burst pipe properly and checking all the related plumbing in my unit and the adjacent units. Apparently, the pipes in several townhouses were in bad shape due to age and poor maintenance. The HOA was going to have to do a lot more work to prevent future problems. While the plumbers worked, I had my HVAC company come back out to inspect the furnace. They dried out the electrical systems, replaced a damaged sensor, and certified that everything was working properly. Total cost was $600. I documented everything and sent the bill to the HOA as the judge had ordered. On February 18th, 7 days after the hearing exactly, the plumbing repairs were complete and my furnace was running perfectly. I turned off the propane heater, drained it, and put it back in storage. I took photos showing it was removed and sent them to Heather. "Congratulations," she said when she called. "You're in full compliance, which means the fines are reduced to $100, and the HOA owes you $600 for the furnace repairs and $400 for the emergency plumbing. Net result, they owe you $900. Will they actually pay it?" The judge ordered it. They don't have a choice. A week later, I received a check from the Oakmont Meadows HOA for $900, along with a terse letter from Nathan Cross stating that all violations had been cleared from my record. I deposited the check immediately. But the real fireworks came in March when the audit results were released. The court-appointed accountant found significant irregularities in the HOA's finances. Over the past 3 years, Patricia Winters had approved multiple contracts with vendors who had connections to her property management company. Some of these contracts were for work that was never performed or was performed at inflated prices. The accountant estimated that approximately $60,000 in HOA funds had been misappropriated. The report was distributed to all Oakmont Meadows homeowners. The reaction was swift and angry. An emergency HOA meeting was called, and this time, the community center was packed. Every seat was filled and people were standing in the back. Patricia tried to maintain control of the meeting, but homeowners were shouting questions at her. Where did the money go? Why were we paying for work that was never done? How long has this been happening? George stood up and made a formal motion to remove Patricia Winters as HOA president, citing the audit findings and breach of fiduciary duty. This time, Patricia could not ignore the motion. Another board member, a man named Frank, seconded it. The vote was called. Of the 5 board members, 4 voted to remove Patricia. She was the only vote against. She was removed effective immediately. Patricia stood up, her face red with anger and humiliation. "You people don't know what you're doing. This HOA will fall apart without proper leadership." "We'll take our chances," Helen said from her seat. "Please leave." Patricia grabbed her things and stormed out. The meeting continued with Frank temporarily assuming the president role until a proper election could be held, but it did not end there. 2 weeks later, I was having dinner with Emma when I saw police cars pull up outside Patricia's house. She lived in Oakmont Meadows too, in a larger end unit. I watched as officers knocked on her door and, after a brief conversation, placed her in handcuffs and led her to a police car. I found out later that the district attorney had reviewed the audit and determined that Patricia's actions constituted theft and fraud. She had been criminally charged. The investigation also revealed that she had been running similar schemes in 2 other HOAs where her property management company operated. The case made local news. Several articles ran in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette about HOA corruption and the need for better oversight. I was interviewed for one article, though I used only my first name and they didn't publish my photo at Emma's mother's request. In April, there was a special election for HOA president. Helen ran unopposed and won. One of her first acts was to eliminate many of the petty rules that Patricia had enforced so aggressively. The new guidelines focused on actual property maintenance and safety rather than aesthetic micromanagement. I attended the first board meeting under the new leadership. Helen started by apologizing to several homeowners who had been hit with frivolous fines over the years. "This HOA is supposed to serve our community, not rule over it," she said. "We're going to do better." The meeting ended with a proposal to use some of the HOA's reserve funds to upgrade the aging plumbing throughout the development, preventing future pipe bursts like the one that had hit my unit. The proposal passed unanimously. By May, life had returned to normal. My furnace worked perfectly. I had no outstanding violations. Emma came over on her regular schedule and we spent weekends playing at the park and riding bikes through the neighborhood. One Saturday afternoon, I ran into Doug Simmons at the grocery store. He looked uncomfortable when he saw me. "Hey, Travis, how are things?" "Good, Doug. How about you? Still doing compliance?" He shook his head. "Actually, I quit last month. Found a job with a landscaping company. Better pay, less stress." "That's great. Listen, I wanted to say something. I'm sorry about how things went down. Patricia had all of us convinced that we were just doing our jobs, maintaining standards. I didn't realize how far over the line she had gone until the audit came out. You were just following orders, I get it. Yeah, but still, you stood up to her when nobody else would. That took guts. A lot of people in this neighborhood are glad you did." We shook hands and went our separate ways. It felt like a small moment of closure. In June, Patricia Winters pleaded guilty to multiple counts of theft and fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution of $60,000 to the Oakmont Meadows HOA. Her property management company was dissolved, and she was barred from serving on any HOA board in Pennsylvania for life. I felt vindicated, but more than that, I felt like the system had worked. It had taken months and cost me time, stress, and money, but standing up to someone who was abusing their power had led to real consequences and real change. One evening in July, I was sitting on my porch watching Emma play with her chalk, drawing elaborate pictures on the driveway. Helen walked by with her dog and stopped to chat. "Beautiful evening," she said. "Sure is. You know, I've been thinking. We should update the HOA covenant to include specific provisions for emergency situations. Something that explicitly allows temporary measures during weather emergencies, equipment failures, things like that. Would you be willing to serve on a committee to draft that language?" "Yeah, I think I would." "Great. We need people who understand why these protections matter. I'll send you the details." She continued her walk, and I sat there thinking about how much had changed since that frozen January day when my furnace died. What started as a simple emergency had turned into a months-long battle, but it had exposed corruption, changed leadership, and would hopefully prevent future homeowners from being harassed for taking care of their families. Emma came running up to the porch. "Daddy, look what I drew." She showed me a picture of a house with two stick figures standing in front. "That's you and me," she said. "It's perfect, sweetheart." As the sun set over Oakmont, I realized that this place finally felt like home. Not because the HOA was perfect now, but because the community had shown it was willing to stand up for what was right when it mattered. That is all anyone can really ask for. The following month, I received my first HOA newsletter under Helen's leadership. It included a community calendar, maintenance updates, and a message from the new president about transparency and accountability. There was also a notice about the upcoming vote on the covenant amendments, which would include the emergency provisions we had been working on. The vote passed with 90% approval. The new language explicitly allowed temporary emergency measures during extreme weather, equipment failures, or other circumstances where immediate action was necessary to prevent property damage or ensure resident safety. The HOA retained the right to require that such measures be removed once the emergency was resolved. But fines could only be levied after a reasonable period, and only if the homeowner was acting in bad faith. It was common sense stuff, but having it in writing meant that no future Patricia Winters could weaponize the rules against residents who were just trying to take care of their homes and families. In September, Emma started 3rd grade. She had adjusted well to the custody arrangement, spending half the week with me and half with her mother. On my weeks, we had fallen into a comfortable routine. I would make breakfast while she got ready for school, drop her off, go to my job as a civil engineer, pick her up in the afternoon, and we would do homework together before dinner. One evening, she asked me about what had happened with the HOA. "Daddy, why were those people being mean to you about the heater?" I thought about how to explain it in terms she would understand. Sometimes people get too focused on rules and forget about being kind. They thought following the rules exactly was more important than making sure we were safe and warm. That's dumb. Yeah, kind of, but the good news is we fixed it. Now the rules are better. Like how Mrs. Peters changed the rules in class so we could have extra recess if we finish our work. Exactly like that. She seemed satisfied with that explanation and went back to her homework. Kids have a way of cutting through complexity to the core truth of things. The HOA had been dumb about their rules, we had fixed it, and now life was better. Simple as that. By October, the plumbing upgrades throughout Oakmont Meadows were complete. The HOA had hired a reputable contractor who replaced aging pipes in all 30 townhouses in the development. My unit had been one of the first done back in February, but now everyone was protected against the kind of pipe burst that had caused so much trouble. The project had been expensive, requiring the HOA to assess each homeowner an additional $500. Some people grumbled about the cost, but most understood it was necessary maintenance that should have been done years ago. If Patricia had been managing funds properly instead of siphoning money off to her cronies, the reserve fund probably would have covered it. George, my neighbor who had first warned me about Patricia's schemes, invited me over for a beer one Saturday afternoon. We sat in his backyard while Emma played with his grandkids who were visiting. "You know what the craziest thing is?" George said. "I lived here for 15 years and just accepted that the HOA was going to be a pain in the butt. I paid my fines, kept my head down, and counted the days until I could leave. You lived here for 3 months and changed everything." "I just didn't want to freeze," I said. And I really didn't want to back down when someone was being unreasonable. That's the difference. Most of us were willing to tolerate unreasonable because fighting it seemed harder. You showed us it was worth fighting. We drank our beers and watched the kids play. The leaves were changing colors, and the weather was that perfect autumn temperature where you don't need a jacket but you're not hot either. Pennsylvania autumns are beautiful. "You hear Patricia's trying to appeal her sentence?" George asked. "Yeah, I saw that. Her lawyer is arguing that 3 years is excessive for a first offense. Thinks she'll get it reduced. Doesn't matter to me either way. She's banned from HOAs and her company is gone. That's the important part. True enough." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then George said, "I'm actually thinking about staying." "I thought you were retiring to Florida." "I was. But you know what? I like it here. I've got friends, I know the area, and my grandkids visit. Why leave just because the HOA was bad? The HOA is good now. Helen's doing a great job." "She really is. So I'm staying. Going to be one of those old guys who sits on his porch and yells at teenagers." "You're already that guy," he laughed. "Fair point." November brought the holidays. Thanksgiving was at Jennifer's place that year per our custody agreement, but I had Emma for Christmas. We decorated the townhouse together, putting up a tree in the living room and hanging lights outside. I checked the HOA guidelines first to make sure there were no weird restrictions on holiday decorations. There were not. One of Helen's changes had been simplifying the decoration rules. As long as everything was tasteful and didn't create a safety hazard, homeowners had free rein. On Christmas morning, Emma ran downstairs at 6 a.m. to find Santa had brought her a new bike. We spent the day inside because it was snowing heavily, watching movies and eating too much candy. It was perfect. The new year arrived with much better weather than the previous January. We had cold days, but nothing like the brutal sub-zero stretch that had started this whole saga. My furnace ran smoothly throughout the winter. I kept the propane heater in storage as a backup, but I never needed it. In March, I attended the 1-year anniversary of Patricia's removal at a community meeting. Helen presented an annual report showing how the HOA had operated over the past year. Finances were transparent and properly managed. Maintenance issues were addressed promptly. Complaints were down. Satisfaction surveys showed that 85% of residents felt the HOA was serving the community well, up from 30% the previous year. "We've come a long way," Helen said, "but we can't get complacent. Good governance requires ongoing effort and participation. I want to thank everyone who has served on committees, attended meetings, and helped make this community better." She specifically thanked me for my work on the Covenant Amendment Committee. I got a round of applause from the other residents. It felt good to be recognized, but more than that, it felt good to know that my fight had mattered. After the meeting, several people came up to share their own stories about problems they had faced under Patricia's leadership. A man named Carlos told me about being fined for having the wrong color garage door. A woman named Susan described being harassed for weeks over a garden gnome that Patricia deemed unsightly. Everyone had a story. Patricia had made many people's lives difficult with her petty tyranny. "Why didn't anyone do anything before?" I asked. Carlos shrugged. "Fear, mostly, and ignorance. We didn't know we could fight back. You showed us it was possible." As spring turned to summer, life in Oakmont Meadows continued peacefully. The landscaping looked great, maintained by the company Doug now worked for. Neighborhood kids played in the common areas without HOA busybodies shooing them away. People actually talked to each other again, instead of avoiding contact for fear of being reported for some minor violation. In June, I got a call from Heather Klein, the lawyer who had represented me. "Travis, I wanted to thank you. For what? Your case led to some significant changes. I've had 3 other HOA clients since then, and all of them resolved quickly because I could point to your case and the judge's rulings. The HOAs backed down immediately rather than risk the same scrutiny. You set a precedent. Glad I could help, I guess. More than help. You showed that HOA boards can be held accountable. That's huge. I'm working with some state legislators now on HOA reform legislation. Your story is part of what convinced them this is an issue worth addressing. We talked for a while about potential reforms. Things like mandatory transparency in HOA finances, limits on fines, requirements for good faith efforts to work with homeowners on violations, and conflict of interest provisions. If the legislation passed, it would prevent future Patricias from abusing their power. After we hung up, I thought about how strange life is. A year and a half ago, I had just wanted to keep my daughter warm during a cold snap. That simple act of self-preservation had led to a legal battle, criminal charges, leadership changes, community reforms, and now potential state legislation. Small actions can have big consequences. In August, Emma and I took a vacation to Ocean City, Maryland. We spent a week on the beach, building sandcastles and swimming in the waves. She had gotten good on her new bike, and we rode the boardwalk every evening, stopping for ice cream and carnival games. One night, as we sat on the beach watching the sunset, Emma said, "I like our house, Daddy." "Me too, kiddo." "Are we going to stay there?" "That's the plan." "Why?" "Some kids at school move around a lot. I don't want to move." "We're not moving. We're staying right where we are." She seemed relieved. Stability matters to kids, especially when their parents are divorced. Knowing she had 2 homes that were not going to change gave her security. We returned to Oakmont at the end of August, just in time for Emma to start 4th grade. The neighborhood was preparing for fall, with the HOA planning a community harvest festival in October. Helen had organized it as a way to bring everyone together and celebrate how far the community had come. The festival was held on a perfect October Saturday. There were food trucks, games for kids, a pumpkin carving contest, and live music from a local band. It felt like a real community for the first time since I had moved in. People were relaxed and happy, not worried about being reported for having their trash cans visible or walking on the wrong section of grass. I ran into Doug Simmons at the festival. He was there with his wife and kids. "This is nice," he said, gesturing at the crowd. "Really different from how things used to be. Helen's done a great job bringing people together." "She has. You know, I never told you this, but I'm glad you stood up to Patricia. I felt like crap doing a lot of that compliance work." She would send me out to document violations that made no sense, and I'd do it because it was my job. But it didn't sit right with me. "You did what you had to do. No hard feelings." "I appreciate that. Hey, my landscaping company is doing the fall cleanup for the HOA. We're doing good work at fair prices. No kickbacks, no shady deals, just honest service. That's what it should be." We watched our kids play together on the bouncy castle. Life had a way of working itself out if you stood up for what was right and gave people the chance to do better. As winter approached again, I made sure to have my furnace serviced and inspected. The technician gave it a clean bill of health. The new unit was high quality and properly installed. I should not have any problems for years. I kept the propane heater in my storage area, though. Not because I expected to need it, but because it had become a symbol to me. That heater represented my willingness to take care of my family regardless of what bureaucrats thought. It represented standing up to power when power was wrong. It represented the idea that sometimes you have to fight, even when fighting is costly and difficult. On the anniversary of the day my original furnace died, I was sitting in my living room reading while Emma did homework at the kitchen table. The house was warm and comfortable. Through the window, I could see snow falling gently, covering Oakmont Meadows in a peaceful white blanket. My phone buzzed with a text from Helen. HOA board meeting next week. Hope you can make it. We're voting on next year's budget. I texted back that I would be there. Being involved in the HOA was not something I had ever imagined myself doing, but it mattered. Communities function when people participate and hold their leaders accountable. I had learned that lesson the hard way. Emma looked up from her math homework. "Daddy, can you help me with this problem?" "Sure, kiddo. What are you working on?" She showed me a long division problem she was stuck on. We worked through it together and she got that satisfied look kids get when something clicks in their brain. "I get it now." "Thanks, Daddy. You're welcome." She went back to her homework and I went back to my book. Outside, the snow continued falling. The neighborhood was quiet and peaceful. My house was warm. My daughter was safe and happy. The HOA was functioning properly. Life was good. Sometimes I thought about what would have happened if I had just complied with Patricia's initial demands. If I had removed the heater and taken Emma to a hotel for 2 weeks while waiting for furnace repairs. It would have been expensive and inconvenient, but it would have avoided all the conflict and stress. But then Patricia would have continued abusing her power. Other homeowners would have continued suffering under her petty tyranny. The financial mismanagement would have continued. Nothing would have changed. By choosing to fight, by refusing to accept unreasonable demands, I had sparked a process that made things better not just for me but for everyone in the community. That was worth the stress and the cost. The story could have ended in disaster. I could have lost my house to foreclosure. The legal fees could have bankrupted me. The HOA could have won and made my life miserable. But none of those things happened because I was right. The law supported me, and enough people were willing to stand up once someone showed them how. As I sat there in my warm living room, watching snow fall while my daughter did homework, and everything felt peaceful and normal, I realized that this was the happy ending. Not some dramatic climax, but just ordinary life proceeding smoothly, because systems were working as they should. The propane heater that had started everything sat unused in storage. My furnace ran efficiently. The HOA operated transparently and fairly. Patricia Winters was in prison paying for her crimes. The community had learned to value good governance over petty rule enforcement. It was not the story I expected when I moved to Oakmont Meadows, but it was a good story. One about standing up for what is right, holding power accountable, and refusing to accept unreasonable demands. Those principles matter whether you are dealing with an HOA, a government, a corporation, or any other institution that has authority over your life. Emma finished her homework and came over to sit next to me on the couch. "Can we watch a movie?" "Sure. What do you want to watch?" "How about the one with the princess and the dragon?" "Sounds perfect." I put on the movie, and we settled in together under a blanket. Outside, the snow continued falling on Oakmont Meadows, covering everything in clean white. Inside, my daughter and I were warm and safe and happy. And that, ultimately, was all that mattered. Everything else had just been the fight to make sure that remained true, and it was a fight I was glad I had not backed down from.